Frankenstein is a science fiction horror film released by Universal Pictures on November 21st, 1931. Based on Peggy Webling's 1927 play adaptation of Mary Shelley's novel of the same name, the film was written by Francis Edward Farreau, Garrett Fort, Robert Florey, and John Russell. The film was directed by James Whale and stars Boris Karloff, Colin Clive, May Clark, John Bowles, and Edward Van Sloan. Mary Shelley's tale of a scientist bringing life to something that should not live has permanently impacted itself on the human psyche, with one story about one monster single-handedly conjuring a nightmarish reputation on par with cryptids with centuries of tales under their belt. The Frankenstein movie has become no less iconic, burning the image of a square-headed, stitch-ridden ghoul with bolts in its neck into the minds of horror enthusiasts and casual pop culture fans alike. Boris Karloff's portrayal of Frankenstein's monster, along with Bela Lugosi's portrayal of Dracula, led to Universal Pictures taking a chokehold of the horror genre in movies at the time. But it is now an ancient property, with many in the present day not being able to claim they've seen it. So for a film so impactful and recognizable, it must be asked, why is it an icon? What gives this movie its staying power? In this review, we are breathing life into a long-gone entity to try and understand what it does with the life it is given.
Just as a warning to those of you who haven't seen this movie yet, there are major spoilers ahead. If you wish to see this movie for yourself, without having anything spoiled for you, please click off the video now. Now, without further ado, let's get into it.
The story begins with Dr. Henry Frankenstein and his assistant unearthing a recently buried body, as well as cutting down a body from a nearby gallows. We learn that Frankenstein is doing this to try and find a good human brain. After having no success, Frankenstein sends Fritz to the local university, where after a lecture studying the human brain, Fritz sneaks into the university, initially taking the sample of the normal human brain. Fritz is startled by an unseen noise, however, dropping the brain on the floor and ruining it. Fritz is thus forced to take off with an abnormal brain, taken from the body of a murderer. When preparing the body he has assembled for his experiment, Frankenstein is approached by his fiancée Elizabeth, his best friend Victor, and his former university mentor Dr. Waldman, who have become concerned about Frankenstein's absence from their lives. Frankenstein reluctantly brings the group up to his study, where he reveals everything he has done, and how by the end of the storm brewing overhead, he will have done the unthinkable. He will have created life. As the storm reaches its height, Frankenstein hoists the experimental body up towards the roof of the study, where it catches the lightning in the storm. Upon bringing the body down, it begins to stir, and then move freely. The body is now alive. In the following days, Frankenstein and Dr. Waldman are seen attempting to train the creature, teaching it how to walk and sit and introducing it to sunlight. Though initially things go well, Fritz appears with a torch. The creature is found to be terrified of fire and goes into a frenzy which forces the group to lock him in the cellar. Upon being shackled, Fritz proceeds to torment the creature, waving the fire of the torch in his face, paralyzing it with fear. Later on, Frankenstein and Dr. Waldman are drawn into the cellar after hearing Fritz scream. They arrive to the sight of Fritz hanging from the ceiling. The two men are forced to sedate the creature, admitting that they now have no choice but to destroy it. The group is disrupted by the untimely arrival of Elizabeth and Frankenstein's father, who insists that Henry return home so he and Elizabeth may be wed. After grappling with the beast, Frankenstein faints upon the arrival of his father and Elizabeth. It is decided that Henry must return home in order to recover from his ordeal, while Dr. Waldman will destroy the creature. After Henry returns home and Dr. Waldman prepares the creature for destruction, the creature awakens from its sedative, murdering Dr. Waldman before fleeing the study, going out into the world. The creature happens upon a farm as it explores the countryside. It plays with a little girl who shows him how flowers can float in the lake. Getting excited, the creature picks up the girl and throws her into the water, accidentally drowning her. Panicked, the creature flees the scene, eventually making its way to the hometown of Frankenstein, where his wedding is already underway. The creature breaks into the Frankenstein house and manages to get into the same room as Elizabeth. Though shocked by the encounter, the creature flees the scene as people arrive, leaving Elizabeth unharmed. The father of the girl the creature drowned is next seen showing up at the doorstep of the town's mayor, his daughter's lifeless body in his arms and a mob forming behind him. The mayor quickly organizes a search party to track down the creature, which Frankenstein participates in. As the massive mob of townspeople swarm through the countryside surrounding the town, Frankenstein has a run-in with the creature, who knocks him out before carrying him to an abandoned windmill. The townspeople notice this and quickly surround the windmill. As the mob tries to break in, Frankenstein comes to, facing off with his creation. After a brief struggle, the creature gets the upper hand, throwing Frankenstein from the top of the windmill. He falls to the ground, hitting the windmill on the way down, but miraculously survives. While some of the townspeople rush to return Frankenstein to safety, the rest of the mob set the windmill alight. The creature becomes trapped in the falling debris of the windmill, left to burn alive as the townspeople look on. In the final moments of the movie, Frankenstein can be seen recovering with Elizabeth by his side. His father shares a toast to his health, to having a son to lead the House of Frankenstein. So it's pretty plain to see why the iconic moments of the movie are iconic. A lot of effort went into making those scenes stand out, and they really do carry the movie as a result. However, if you try to put it into the context of the rest of the movie, you'll find the contrast between the standout scenes and the filler is just a little bit too great. In the iconic shots of the movie, no expense is spared when it comes to the camera work. The shots of Frankenstein and the monster staring each other down through the spokes of the windmill, the tracking shots of the farmer carrying his drowned daughter through town while a crowd forms behind him, and the panning shot of the dolly carrying the monster's body to the top of the windmill are all scenes that really pop. Other standout scenes include the monster meeting the girl, the very beginning scene where Frankenstein and Fritz are seen looting a grave, and the haunting scene of a burning windmill with a crowd looking on. These scenes are pretty intense even for their minimal approach, but once you get past the visual flair this movie provides, the entertainment value is pretty hit or miss. While Boris Karloff does pretty good as a physically imposing beast who never says a word, the rest of the performances are pretty stiff. They aren't necessarily bad, but they realistically accomplish only the bare minimum of bringing scenes from start to finish. While the energy of the drowned girl's father and the heated intensity of the mob hunting the monster are palpable, you'd be hard-pressed to find any individual performances that are worth singling out beyond the scene of bringing the monster to life. The movie's pacing is another problem that gets hard to ignore going into the second half of the movie. While some individual scenes are shorter than they ought to be near the start, the transitions were pretty smooth until the point of Henry returning home for his wedding. The scenes trying to establish the romance between Henry and Elizabeth feel more like a distraction from the monster's activities than a legitimate addition to the story. In the original novel, the monster ends up killing Frankenstein's fiancée, an act that drives Frankenstein over the edge and into a state of madness that severely impacts the outcome of the story. While it seems like they almost incorporated that into the movie, they decided it would be better to play it safe and have a happy ending for some reason, thus meaning everyone save the monster and Dr. Waldman are alive by story's end. This and the ending of the movie with Frankenstein recovering while his father toasts him is super out of place with the dark and dreary tone the movie tries to go for, and because of that, the little momentum the movie had built up ends up nosediving right off a cliff. The other major item of note for this movie is that it doesn't have a soundtrack. Every scene relies only on sound effects and existing audio to establish the atmosphere. Though it's hard to really comment on something that isn't there, it's probably safe to say that this movie would have benefited from having a soundtrack, especially considering how many of its contemporaries made use of one. While the story of the movie is one that instantly gets your attention, the movie suffers from a pretty short runtime. Any chance that might have existed to flesh out the development of the monster, or dive into the musings of Frankenstein and what his pursuit to create life cost him, end up going unexplored, leaving a minimal product which works for what it is, but just ends up leaving audiences wanting. While you have to consider how much different the process of making movies was in the 30s, the final product is all we have to work with. And even despite the limitations of the time, there's still more that could have been done. The final rating for this visit from beyond the grave is 6.5 out of 10, though it would be foolish to ignore the impact its well-composed scenes and visuals have had on the face of horror movie history. It is held back by its short runtime, stiff acting, and minimal effects. Though it was immensely important for exhibiting the potential of Frankenstein and his monster in cinema, it fails to capture the essence of its source material, and the technological limitations of its time means it could achieve no more than being a footnote in history. And yet somehow, through all the decades of film that followed, it manages to be the best received version of Frankenstein yet. Your move, Hollywood.
And that will be it for today. Thank you all for stopping by. If for whatever reason you enjoyed what you saw today, consider sticking around, maybe leaving a like or subscribing if you wish. And if you have any recommendations for movies you want to see reviewed in the future, be sure to drop those down in the comments. There's plenty more to come, so if that's something you care about, I'll see you when I see you.